So is this me or?
I don't know. Donna, are you going to open us up? Are we expecting some more people?
People are still gathering, so I think let's just hold on just a few, maybe another minute or two, and then Margaret, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you.
I do have a question while we're waiting. Then you mentioned having a female rabbi. How prevalent is that?
Well, in the Reform movement of Judaism, the Reform movement of Judaism was the first major movement to ordain women as rabbis. We started almost 50 years ago in 1972. By the time I was in rabbinic school, I started in 1988. My class was the first class to have more women than men in it. When we started and we were ordained in 1993, we were also the first class to have more women than men in it upon ordination. So, there may have been some before us that had, more women than they started, but not when they were ordained, when those classes were ordained. But so you think about it, I've been a rabbi for almost 30 years. And many of my classmates have gone on to other congregations. They've been in associate roles, assistant roles. They've been in campus ministerial roles. They've been in, well, pretty much you name it. And, and in senior rabbi roles also. Libby Fisher is her name, and she will be joining our congregation. She will not be the first female rabbi to serve our congregation. We had a part-time rabbi before I came here. She's also not the first, the first rabbi to serve in Greensboro. If you just let me go on for a moment here, a female rabbi serving Greensboro. I think she's about the 7th or the 8th now, many of whom have been with the former American Hebrew Academy. But Beth David Synagogue had had Rabbi Susie Tendler, and there have been many others. I'm sure if I mention their names, you might know or you may not know them. There's also a woman who's a cantor, although she's not serving in that capacity. And I did kind of like one of those mental Rolodex things. There may be more Jewish women serving in clergy roles in the state of North Carolina than there are Jewish men serving in clergy roles. Just to kind of give, the zoom out. That goes for us and for Charlotte and for the Raleigh and the Durham Chapel Hill area, all the way from the coast to the mountains and from the south to the north. The Old North State may be, if not, it's somewhere around the 50-50 mark. And that's pretty great if you consider the long history that Jewish people have here in the South and in the state of North Carolina.
Yeah. Sarah Molino is a personal friend of mine, and her daughter is a rabbi in Portland, and their temple was, is attacked the right word to use, but certainly desecrated in the issues around January 6th. And so, that's been hard. Sarah is a friend. That's been hard.
Yeah, no, she's definitely a friend. I mean, of yours, obviously, Margaret, definitely a friend of mine. And yes, I know that story, and it is it's part of the subject for tonight.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Donna, you give me the signal, or you.
Margaret, I think let's go ahead and get started, and we'll continue to let people in as we get kicked off. Thank you.
Great. Well, Donna and I certainly want to welcome everyone to this second opportunity for us to talk about the very challenging and hard topic of anti-Semitism. And we're indebted to David Partington, who is a member of First Presbyterian's Race Task Force that has been working in our church to help us to understand the underlying impact and in our personal lives and in the lives of our church and in our community of institutional systemic racism. And we've been at that for more years than I had realized until just recently. I was trying to do a little writing about our history of involvement. And at our meeting on January 6th that we had scheduled, we gathered around and prayed for our country. And following that opportunity to be together, which meant a whole lot to all of us, David raised up the concern about how much evidence of anti-Semitism there was in the crowd that stormed the Capitol. And that led us to think about our relationship that we have had for years and years with Temple Emmanuel, and it's been a very important relationship for First Presbyterian to have, but also how much we don't know about the issues that our Jewish friends experience in our society. And so we welcomed our friend Fred Gutman last week, and now Andy to be with us. And I'm going to start this is always hard for me to read because it means a lot to me, a statement that was adopted by the General Assembly some years ago entitled Facing Racism. And our tradition for our race task force has been to read this together, but because it's hard to read something together via Zoom, I'm going to read it in my emotional, cracky voice. And so I hope you will listen and you will hear God's word as I'm reading. This is the statement facing racism. God created human beings, a diverse family, to live together and to love one another as God loves us. We violate God's intention for the human family by creating false categories of value and identity based on identifiable characteristics such as culture, place of origin, and skin color. We use these categories to create a race-based system which benefits some while oppressing others. Racism is fundamentally a spiritual problem because it denies our true identity as children of God. God frees us to love and teaches us through the empowering presence of the Holy Spirit how to live as a family. We are led by the Holy Spirit to participate in transforming personal lives, dismantling institutional racism, healing racial prejudice and hatred, and building the beloved community for all of God's children. And now, Jill, will you open us with prayer? Thank you.
Absolutely. Let's pray. Almighty God, we thank you for bringing us together this evening. We pray that you would open our hearts and minds. We are grateful for this opportunity to learn and listen. We are sobered and grieved by what we heard last week. Those of us who profess to follow Jesus lament the many ways in which Christians have participated in anti-Semitism and oppression and violence in the name of the Prince of Peace. We pray that we would have ears to hear, and not just ears to hear, but that we would have the courage to act in ways that bring about reconciliation, that we know is your will because of your creation of each and every one of us in your image. Thank you for Rabbi Andy for his presence this evening, for the gift of his time and his friendship. All of this we pray in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Margaret and Jill. As both of them mentioned to you all, this is the second part of a series that we are having around anti-Semitism. And Rabbi Fred, started us out last week with the history of the Christian roots of anti-Semitism. And Andy is going to follow tonight by helping us think about where to go from here. And so we look forward to hearing his words and also hopefully having some time where we can go into some possible breakout rooms and talk about some of the ways that we might continue to think about acting together. Before we turn it over to Andy, I just wanted to say a few words about Andy. Andy is the assistant rabbi and the director of religious education at Temple Emmanuel. And as you all heard last week, starting in July, he will be the senior rabbi. So Fred will be retiring, and Andy, who's been long time working alongside of Fred, will be the senior rabbi for Temple Emmanuel. Andy has done, he came in 2003. I didn't realize that, Andy, when I was looking at your bio, which is the same time I came to Greensboro. So we've both been in our positions for almost 18 years, which is hard to believe, but good time at both of us and great callings. Along with his work at Temple Emmanuel, before he came, Andy was actually doing campus ministry in Florida. And he spent lots of time with college students and with youth does lots of advocacy and work with teens, gone on many trips to the DC area teaching teens about social justice, public policy, as well as advocacy work. Andy is the co-moderator of the Greensboro Faith Leaders Council since 2014. He's doing that currently with Kim Pretty, that we all know and love. And like I mentioned last week, enjoyed going immensely with Andy to the Holy Land, and such a memorable time, and learned so much from he and Fred and Joshua, and look forward to the time that we'll spend tonight. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you so much, Donna. It's been a long run. I mean, 18 years. The number 18 in the Jewish tradition. You know how there's Roman numerals, right? They count the Super Bowl. I've lost track now what Super Bowl it is. But we also have Hebrew numerals. Every Hebrew letter also has a numerical value. For those of you who are taking notes tonight, this will be on your final exam. And the number 18, it turns out, corresponds to the Hebrew numerals, which are exactly the same as the Hebrew word for life. And I really do believe that this is a blessing, a life-affirming blessing to be here in Greensboro, North Carolina. I know that every time I walk out of the front doors, those doors that we've shared over on Green Street, right? Because for a few years, that was where your holy congregation, was joining for prayer. And whenever I look across the street, right, I know that it's a blessing. And I know that Jewish star, and I mean, everybody's got to talk about this, right? That Jewish star in the window, that means the world. I've had visitors, family members, Israelis come to town, and I brag on that, about the nature of our past, but also what it means in the present and the promise that it holds for the future. I also commend you for the work that you're doing on racism as a whole, right? Because, it's there in Genesis 1. I mean, you figure something's important when they put it in to the first chapter of the first book of the Bible, right? And we are created in the image of God, not this, that, or the other, but that we all are created in God's image. So I figure, 26th chapter of the book of, the 26th verse of the first chapter of the book of Genesis, it's got to nail it, right? And that's so central. And I feel that you're taking on these subjects, and also taking the time to go into anti-Semitism. Now, I know Rabbi Gutman spent a little time, Fred spent a little time, maybe a lot of time last week. I'm going to spend a little more time today. And then I think that the question was going to be about, well, where do we go from here? And I think that I join you in the work that we all need to do in terms of checking privilege vis-a-vis racial issues. Maybe not all of us. I don't know everybody's racial background or profile. That's okay. But I join in that work. And yet the work of countering anti-Semitism, being an anti-Semite, right? More than just having Jewish friends, more than just being neighbors, but being an anti-Semite is really, really important. If I have the ability to share my screen, and here, if you are taking notes, that's fine. And if not, that's good too. I mean, some of this will just make an impression, but whoever is able to enable that, you're going to want to just pay attention to your screen. The other thing I should probably do is transport myself virtually back from Jerusalem, my wife's hometown, to here in Greensboro. I'll go ahead. I just like these virtual backgrounds better than you having to look at, the 4 feet by 4 feet that I now call my office in my bedroom. Here I am out in front of Temple Emmanuel on this sunny day. And I'm still disabled. Or whatever the first thing is there. If not, if you make me a co-host, I should be able to share my screen.
Donna, can you do that? I think you're hosting.
Actually, I hit both those. Yolanda, is it on your end?
And make him a co-host. Let me see if I can do that.
I thought I clicked on it twice, but
think if I get off, he's able to become a co-host. Let me try that.
Okay. Thank you.
Did he just disappear?
Are you able to now, Andy?
Looks like he's disappeared.
He just disappeared from our screen.
Ooh, that's not good.
Yeah, it's set up at the top. Andy Koren left.
Weird. Hold on 1 second. Well, it worked last week with Fred. Let's see what might be happening.
Maybe he got kicked off on his end, perhaps. It's been known to happen occasionally.
Donna, are you recording this?
Yes, we sure are.
Yeah, we'll want to replay this silence.
Replay our Zoom difficulty.
Donna, do you want me to text Yolanda and tell her what's going on?
I actually did. I think she went off to allow Andy to be the co-host, but I just let her know that he got kicked off too. So let me, he said he thinks the problem's on his end. He's gonna switch computers.
Oh no.
Gotta love technology.
It's great when it works.
Yeah.
Flummoxed when it doesn't.
I know you do, Brenda.
Do what?
Your nose is
you
getting
know I
longer
do.
if you say that.
Yep, I was ready to go right to that snail mail.
That's okay. It's okay.
Thanks to Dottie Blanchard for posting the YouTube of last week.
Yes, and we sent that to several folks who, for some reason, we were talking early on, we got several emails from folks saying they did not get the link. And on our end, it showed every person received it. So today, Yolanda said that she realized when she continued to get emails from people for this week too, that everybody who didn't receive it had an AOL address. So we've never had an issue with that in the past, but
Maybe
AOL,
AOL,
I got it. Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if AOL may have decided it was people's spam filters or something. Maybe it was something AOL was filtering out.
Yolanda.
Hey, Don, I'm here.
So Andy says that somehow he got kicked off and he's trying to go to another computer. He thought his first spot may have been the problem.
I wonder if he can log in as host. I'll see if I can reach out to him via email.
Well, anybody want to sing or dance or back in the Glenn Bannerman days, he would say, everybody talk to your neighbor. but that might be the chair in your living room or.
Last night we were watching television and saw two wonderful things. One was Dolly Parton getting her shot and singing that the vaccination, and the other was this wonderful person who created a vaccination dance, and it was an ethnic dance. It was fabulous fun, and just, I mean, for all of us to be able to get vaccinations and get finished and quit Zooming and be together, really. I describe it as being in the same room with the same air. I'm just, but there are lots of folks who are going to be able to be healthy and well. So that's good. So I can't sing and dance, but I sure have enjoyed others.
I'm not sure how to pull it up, but I know that it would be able to be pulled up on YouTube or something. There's a spoof of the King from Hamilton singing about the pandemic, but singing, I'll be back. And it's just delightful. Very
great.
Do you know it, Jill?
I've seen it. It's wonderful. It's a priest who has a lot more talent than I do, that's for sure, but it's really good.
Looks like he thinks he can get on now. He's found the right connection, he thinks.
Good deal.
Thank y'all for your patience. Here he is.
That was embarrassing. I'm sorry.
Here you are. We knew this was a tough topic, but
yeah,
we're glad you're back.
Oh my goodness.
It takes a while to fly back from Jerusalem.
It really does, and
that's what I said.
You
spend time traveling here.
My computer picked whatever time to go south, and this is not an old computer, but goodness gracious. Let me just get my thing set up. If I could have sharing opportunities, I'd really like that. And I can get going here, and I'll make this short, albeit not sweet. Here I am out in front of Temple Manual right now. Oh, there we go. Donna, did you want to say something?
No, I was just trying to say I thought I was sharing it, so we're set. Thank you.
Yeah. So as we settle in, so this is what's been on my mind now. Whether it's for the last 2 months almost, believe it or not, or for 3.5 years with points in between. Pittsburgh happens in between. There's an attack on a synagogue in Poway. There was what we already heard mentioned about Sarah Molino's daughter's congregation. August of 2017, Unite the Right rally. And chanting through the streets, Jews will not replace us, you will not replace us. Rabbi Gutman probably talked about ideas of replacement, and this idea that somehow or another Jewish people are the puppet masters of the world. We'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. Or as we saw even in Washington, this Camp Auschwitz sweatshirt. I stood at Auschwitz. I was there with people who survived it. Another with a shirt that had on it 6MWE, which stands for 6 million wasn't enough. You are right to talk about anti-Semitism, even though for a good portion of my time as a rabbi, it was considered passé. I am not the rabbi. In fact, I know very few rabbis who go around looking for anti-Semites under every stone. There are people that like that, who will interpret everything. I'm not that way. I wasn't that way. And it was hard when the signs first started to show here in the West, here at home, just how fragile things were. What is anti-Semitism? Just to go back over a little bit of what Rabbi Gutman talked about last time. It's a form of prejudice that is directed against Jews as individuals and as a group. It is an antiseptic term. You could talk about this in polite company and say, well, it's just anti-Semitism. But it's nothing less than Jew hatred. It's based on stereotypes and myths that target Jews as a people, our religious practices and beliefs. As you can see in front of you, there are certain tropes that cast us in all sorts of negative ways. There are positive stereotypes of Jewish people. And it delegitimizes, demonizes, and applies a double standard vis-a-vis Israel. And so while Rabbi Gutman may have talked about some of the classic definitions of anti-Semitism, I want us to move into the mid to late 20th century, as well as now into the 21st century, because some people are really, I would say, they easily point the finger and say, well, it's all there. It's all Charlottesville. It's all QAnon and the folks that stormed the Capitol. It's all coming from the right wing. Yet we Jewish people have had to be pretty adept at turning our head in many different directions, and also seeing that there are those who are on the left and those who may characterize themselves at all points in between and beyond, who will dig in on Israel. And those three things, what we call the 3Ds, delegitimization, demonization, and double standard, also are within. That's a definition that was applied by Natan Sharansky, who himself had been who was a Soviet dissident, but was a Jewish Soviet dissident and refused to have been jailed for no reason other than he stood up and asserted who his identity was when he was in the Soviet Union. 7 characteristics, what is often hurled at us, the 7 tropes of anti-Semitism. The Jews have all the power or have disproportionate power, that we're the puppet masters behind everything. The conspiracy theories, that we're disloyal somehow or another, that we have dual loyalty wherever Jews have lived, that we're somehow or another loyal to Israel or loyal to something other than where we live unfairly. Greed, that we have all the money, that we are misers, that we don't share. Deicide, I think Rabbi Gutman covered that last time. And the way that this has been passed down in traditional as well as modern teachings. Most recently, it was encapsulated, in films like The Passion of the Christ, a movie that was very difficult to sit through. One that I went and saw. That for some reason, this blood libel, that Jewish people need the blood of children. If you think about one of QAnon's conspiracies, right, is that there's a child ring of pedophiles that are trading in children, or that Jewish people need the blood of children in order to cook matzah. Again, these were shared, and Rabbi Gutman probably talked about this in the medieval period. Holocaust denial, one of the most notorious Holocaust deniers from England. Movie not long ago that you may have seen on that subject. Deborah Lipstadt, who took him on, the historian from Emory who took him on. And last but not least, anti-Zionism, that somehow or another Israel is the new Nazis. Let's talk about anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism for a moment. First off, before I talk about anti-Zionism, I should probably define Zionism and remind you that Zionism is that radical notion, right? That Jews are people too. I first heard that definition applied to feminism. Feminism is the radical notion that women are people too. And Zionism is nothing short of the notion that Jews constitute a people, and that Jews are human and not less than human. That there is a place for us, not only one place for us in our historic land. Not exclusively, Zion, as you know, is one of the nicknames of the land of Israel and the city of Jerusalem. It is a mountain, or at least in North Carolina terms, it would be like a big hill in the city of Jerusalem. Remember, by the rivers of Babylon, my people, exiled, who were taunted by the Babylonians, play us those Jewy songs, dance those Jewy dances you remember here in exile. And we couldn't do it. Remember what we said? If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand lose its strength and my tongue cleave. That's how much we long to return to Zion. This wasn't only a modern time thing. It's been forever. Even when Abraham left and Sarah left the land, they came back. 400 years of slavery, and it took us 40 years to come home, but we did. And close to 2,000 years of exile. That was initiated by the same Romans that are at the heart of the story that you know best. Nearly 2,000 years of exile. Anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. Nowadays, I'm not an anti-Semite, I'm an anti-Zionist. So much so that you see these representations in front of you, that we can't even, at an LGBTQ plus parade, the Dyke March in Chicago, we can't even put a flag out with a Jewish star on it that might be reminiscent of the Israeli flag, but it isn't. Or is it? Or who cares? But Jewish people were told they had to take that pride flag down because it made certain people feel unsafe. Because it was too closely connected to Israel. Anti-Zionism. You might remember that in 1975, the United Nations passes a resolution. Remember this? Zionism is what? Racism. Maybe that's why in the back of many people's heads, they associate this with the issues that we are going through right now. That was one of the most terrible things. And I'm someone who studied international relations. I was hoping to go on to become a diplomat, became a rabbi instead. Some people tell me there's a lot of overlap. Okay. But the United Nations passes a resolution equating Zionism with racism, thanks to the Arab bloc who tried to eradicate Israel from the world, thanks to the former Soviet Union and its allies. Remember what they thought about Jews and the protocols of the learned elders of Zion. It's hard to undo things once they've been put into force there. As long as you support Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state, even if you're critical of certain Israeli policies, keep in mind you're not an anti-Zionist. There are many Israelis who are critical of Israeli policies. They vote in Israeli elections where there might be 30 parties. We're used to 2 parties. 30 parties? There's a lot of criticism in Israel. If you got criticism, get in line behind Israelis. But deny Israel's right to exist? Anti-Zionism are those who deny Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. It differs from other forms of anti-Semitism only in terms of which aspect of Judaism it chooses to hate. The notion that Jews are a people. Am Yisrael, the people or the peoplehood of Israel. You know, it's not the Jewish people who call us a nation for the first time. After we go from being a family to a loose confederation of tribes, but it's in Egypt that Pharaoh looks out and says, this nation, this people. And think about how many times in the Bible we are referred to as the people of Israel. Peoplehood. Deny that. You're denying my ability to define myself. People will argue that Judaism isn't a nation. But guess what? Don't tell us who we are. The disappearance of Israel in modern times would be massive death toll of the Jewish people. And while some people could theoretically oppose statehood before 1948, as was true in many parts of the Jewish community also, we thought, hey, maybe the time isn't right or whatever have you, but not any longer. And last but not least, anti-Zionists would be hard-pressed to find any affirmatively identifying Jew who doesn't see them as mortal enemies. 95% of the world's Jewish people define themselves as Zionists. Being an anti-Zionist, I'm sorry, is just another way of saying I'm an anti-Semite. Remember I told you anti-Semitism was initially created as an antiseptic word to talk about bias and hatred. So is anti-Zionism, and it's time to call that out. Remember the 3 Ds that I told you were put in place? Demonization. Look at some of these cartoons, right? A Jewish person, hard to distinguish that. Maybe that's Israel. You know it is because it's blue and white with the Jewish star and the Israeli flag. And the child there who's about to be devoured by this demon character with, again, that hook nose drawing as characterization that seems to be straight out of Nazi propaganda. The child there is wearing a shirt that has the colors of it on it of the Palestinian flag. Think about how that plays into some of the things we saw before. Or maybe this idea the Jews are going to take over the world, the monkey, right, with the Jewish star, Israel. Jerusalem, from New York City to Kuala Lumpur, undivided eternal capital of Israel. Everything else is negotiable. And I know it was under the Trump administration that America recognizes Israel's capital finally. Maybe you could take issue with that in American politics. But as far as most Jews were concerned, as far as the state of Israel was concerned, didn't mean that we were going to vote for A, B, or C, but it was just setting something that had really been held out against us, right? But not from New York City to Kuala Lumpur, and not with the Pope and others looking on baffled. Demonization. And that's what you see in these characterizations. I may have missed one. No, I didn't. The second one would be double standards. When Israel's held to a standard that is not expected by any other country. For building a security barrier, which some call the apartheid wall. I'm someone who's a veteran of the anti-apartheid movement when there was apartheid in the world in South Africa. Let us sit in on my college campus to get my university to divest funds from a state that was set up, encoded in laws of racial differences. That's not the state of Israel. But for defending itself, that my mother-in-law, father-in-law, and all of my extended family would have the, I'd say, gall to protect themselves, to not accept bombings that were happening routinely. No one else would do that. Israel's denounced for self-defense. And the United Nations Human Rights Council has passed more resolution against Israel than in any other country. That includes North Korea, that includes China, that includes Iran, and go down the list. Myanmar. Double standards. Again, it's not that there's not criticism, but don't make it impossible. And last but not least, delegitimization. That's when folks say that Israel has no right to exist. The burning of a flag. And then look at that. That's the state of Israel. But the flag on it is the Palestinian state. Is there room for a Jewish state on that map? You don't see other borders drawn in or anything reflecting reality. That's the insignia that the Palestine Liberation Organization was putting forward and still does even till this day. But let's come closer to home. Attitudes towards Jews in the United States. On the whole, attitudes towards Jewish people in the United States are positive. There is a lot of philo-Semitism out there. But still, stereotypes are pervasive, and we know what stereotypes can lead to. 69% of those polled had warm versus only 7% cold feelings. But 40% of respondents still believe multiple anti-Semitic statements were true, and 11% believe 6 or more stereotypes about Jews. When I say stereotypes, I don't mean the positive ones. They're related to things like we talked about before, like money or power or other things like that. When the Anti-Defamation League, that's the letters that you see at the bottom here. I took some of their slides. I saw a wonderful presentation recently, which just saved me from doing even more research for today than I did. But the Anti-Defamation League, which is kind of for the Jewish world what the Southern Poverty Law Center is for issues related to racism in here in the United States. They did a global study a couple of years ago, and they found that more than a quarter of the world's population buys into anti-Semitic stereotypes, including places where Jewish people don't even live. Look at some of those stereotypes, that we're more loyal to Israel than the country we live in, and all the other things I talked about before. That's over 1 billion people worldwide. You're right to be concerned about this issue. In fact, just a little bit over a year ago, when the ADL did an audit of the United States anti-Semitism, you can see those increases there. These are incidents, actual incidents. 2019 had seen the largest number of anti-Semitic incidents in the 42 years that the Anti-Defamation League has been looking at this, a 57% rise over 2017. In 2017 over 2016, it was the largest year-to-year increase on record, and there was a 12% increase in 2019. There has not yet come out with the audit from 2020. And if you can take a look at this map here, and I had to look at it closely because the blue on the map, you can see a lot of blue on the map, that's places where there's white supremacist propaganda, and the darker blue is where there have been white supremacist events. But if you look on that map there, the white, and you see a lot of white on this, are anti-Semitic instances. It's not just in one area. Take my native South Florida, or in the greater, New York to Washington corridor, where you have a high concentration of Jewish people. It's pretty much all over the country, folks. From sea to shining sea. Together with other forms of hatred. And when you take hate crimes into consideration relative to our part in society, we are only 2% of the population. And yet, in terms of hate crimes against Jewish people, we represent 60% of hate crimes. There's a lot of talk about anti-Islam, hatred of Muslims. And I know every year there's like the War on Christmas, newscasts. But anti-religious hate, 60%. And as a total of all hate crimes, again, there's our share in the population, 12% of hate crimes target Jewish people. Now, the largest percentage of hate crimes in our country, you don't have to guess this, you could probably say it, are racist hate crimes against African Americans and people of color. It's about 50%. But 12% are anti-Semitic. That's what we're dealing with. It's the world that I've lived in. So I'm going to take my screen down right now. Because you may have some questions just in terms of my presentation, or you may have some questions in terms of things that were not in the presentation but that relate to anti-Semitism. I can tell you that really the only time that I felt anti-Semitism here in North Carolina, here in Greensboro, by the way, I felt a lot of positive feelings. I told you about my feeling when I come out of our front door at Temple Emmanuel down in Green Street, right? And our encounters. But it took place at an immigration rally downtown. And there were a group of activists. Actually, we were on the same side of the immigration issue. But they came at me. Why? Because I'm Jewish and because of my connection to Israel. And of course, the other time that I was here, and here I've got to speak my truth for a moment, that was so painful, was when, and I'll say this out, maybe Rabbi Gutman said it last week, was when PCUSA was considering the resolution against, asking for a boycott of Israel. Whatever it was called, it was given fancy letters like BDS, boycott, divest, and sanction Israel. And I think we realized in watching that this was something that this was highly problematic. It seemed like a small group was trying to lead a much larger conversation. And one of the things that they did was they invited the head of the reform movement of Judaism to come in and speak. But somehow or another, again, he was overruled by a fringe group from within the Jewish world. I told you, 95% of Jewish people consider themselves to be Zionists, but they just happen to have a better name than the reform movement of Judaism. They were called Jewish Voices for Peace. And who wants to be against Jewish Voices for Peace? But if you ask those of us inside the Jewish world, we'll tell you that's an organization that has absolutely no standing within the Jewish world, other than a very small sliver. So you can call and say, well, the mainstream Judaism, no, but this is the real stuff. No, I'm going to call, whatever on that. Call foul, But look at what it did to your precious movement. And I watched the proceedings. I watched them right before Shabbat services, our Friday night Sabbath services. I watched it and I was cringing for most of the time because the things that were being said were straight out of the anti-Semitic playbook. Some of them had to do with Israel, but it was all the other stuff that I showed on that slide with those 7 things there. And friends, I got to tell you, one of the bright moments, and it was one of many, thank God, was when our colleague Jill, Donna, and others who were clergy, when Sid Batts stood up and spoke. Now, I may be paraphrasing, I may be putting words in his mouth, but here's what I heard. There are human rights and there are human wrongs. And this resolution is a human wrong. I love the way that Sid would talk about stuff like that, right? Jill, I'm sure your sermons are as, as powerful in your statements also. But that, it's like our Jewish friends and our Jewish allies. And I'd say part of what comes out of these conversations is that we Jewish people know that we make mistakes. I love Genesis chapter 12, right? Those who bless you shall be blessed, and those who cursed you, look out, right? That's to Abraham and Sarah. I love that I learned about that from Christian clergy and from Christians here in North Carolina, because that's not what we learned about in rabbinic school, that interpretation. Instead, we focused on the first part of Genesis 12, which says, hey, Abraham and Sarah, get up and go and leave this place. And we all overlooked that next passage, which those outside of the Jewish community look at as an ally statement. Look, we should earn everyone's friendship in life by getting to know one another, right? I think Temple Emmanuel and First Presbyterian Church, we can say that we've done that work in the past and we know the work's ahead of us. But allyship and connection, conversation, blessing, I think that's part of our path forward. So look, I was offline for way too long. I'm not sure. Maybe you guys wanted to breakout rooms at that time. Maybe you want to do it at this time. Maybe you have other questions for me, but having spoken that one piece, I'm very grateful and remain grateful to First Presbyterian Church, especially for that moment, because that was a moment of allyship, even though the larger conference, right, larger movement voted otherwise. But thank you for having our backs. Donna or Margaret or Jill, if you want to take the next step, or if you want to lead kind of a Q&A or the next steps, I'm happy to be a part of it. But I've said my piece. Now I want to listen.
Thank you, Andy. What questions do you all have for Andy? You can just unmute yourself and ask your questions.
Well, Andy, this is David, and I just want to say that one of the treasures of my own faith journey and of all of us together are the Hebrew Scriptures. We have the Psalms. We share all of that together. We have creeds that come out of it, like Micah, that inform our faith, and it's just, my faith would be deprived if I did not have the Hebrew Scriptures and the richness of all that is there. And sometimes we hear language about, well, that's Old Testament, or I'm a New Testament Christian or something, but that's wrong. That's such a rich part of our journey in our faith, and I just want to celebrate that and give thanks for that, and tell you of how important that is to us in our own faith journey to have the Hebrew scriptures that accompany us.
Yeah, thank you. And as you're in conversation with Jewish people that remember, some of them are into having those conversations. For others, you might know a heck of a lot more about the Hebrew Bible than they do. And sometimes it get, I see some of you smiling, right? We have a lot of, I know a lot of folks in from Jewish background who are like, wow, the Christian folks that I know really know their Bible inside and out. And we may put emphasis on different parts. I'm just talking about Hebrew scriptures, because most of us, and here I have to admit, even though we grow up in a society where the general conversation, which is much bigger than us, knows Christian scriptures backwards and forwards, and some of us don't have those reference points other than in popular culture. We could do a lot to learn more. Donna, you know this. When I went to Israel with you, right? I brought I brought Christian scriptures with me, right? And because I was learning from you, but I felt I was learning from experts, right? But anytime I sit in fellowship with Christians, I feel like I'm learning with experts. We are not there to convert. Remember that. That does not come off as loving to us. That comes off as pushy, and even if you're nice to us, it shouldn't be with the ulterior motive. And this is hard, because if missionizing is at the center of what some people's faith is, right? If we say no, please understand we've been saying no for a couple thousand years, because on those issues, thank God, we can agree to disagree, because we are a different religion. But upholding our validity is really, really important. And we can engage in the conversation where we can be on equal footing, because we're not going to try to convert you either. But David, thank you for sharing that faith statement. I think that's so powerful.
Andy, this is Margaret. Howard and I, having grown up in Davidson, which is where Davidson College is, which is a Presbyterian college. And when I was growing up as a child, I hardly knew anyone who was not Presbyterian. And we moved to Greensboro and have been embraced by many friends who are Jewish. And as we raised our children, we so admired the bar mitzvah tradition of your faith, and longed for something similar for our own children. And First Presbyterian Church has increased the experience for our children who are professing their faith and growing in their faith. But admiring what y'all do at a time in a child's growth and seeking maturity, when they're very fragile, and your community of family and faith surround them, teach them their traditions, teach them their religious foundations. And we admire that tremendously, and applaud you and thank you for showing us ways to do that better for our own children. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Margaret, for pointing that out. I mean, you should know, the grass always looks greener on the other side, right? As they say, so maybe on the other side of Green Street there, as we look across the street, or maybe across town from where I am right now, fake, I think that we also look out, and we are very grateful. I'll tell you, one of the things that the Jewish community of Greensboro is grateful for, we really are not the culture leaders, right? We are only a fraction of a percent of the world's population, and only about 2% of the United States. And we're right on the number here in Greensboro, which means that how Greensboro is religiously is really shaped by churches, right? By First Presbyterian, by other larger congregations and smaller congregations on all sides of town in all places. You set the larger conversation for us. In places where there is less of a religious voice, the Jewish community, I think, has much more of a challenge. For us, because First Presbyterian and other churches take Sunday morning so seriously, our families do also. We have no one to play against soccer on Sunday morning. So guess what? I can run my Sunday school on Sunday morning and it's a big hit. How about Wednesday nights? That's a good thing. Church on every corner. There's only 2 major synagogues in town. But that overall religious flavor to who we are as a community and the power of the religious voice, that really resonates. We are, how would you say, we're on the same side of that coin, right? Or if you want to, we represent different facets on the diamond. But thank you for saying that about B'nai Mitzvah. And you're right in pointing out that it's a life cycle event at a really, chaotic part of someone's life. 13 years old, my goodness. Okay. However, what we've done, and maybe because of the bigger picture, is that we focused on, and we've been very successful in maintaining the connection of our youth through the end of high school, to the end of 12th grade. And that has been one of the areas that we've been very, very involved with. Anyway, more questions or comments or thoughts or rebuttals? Open to it all.
Well, this is Paula Hoger. I wanted to say I miss you guys being across the street from First Press. I know you have a really nice new facility, but we do miss you, and I just want to thank you that you loaned your synagogue out during our renovations, because my granddaughter got baptized in your synagogue across the street. And it means a lot to us as a family that happened, and because it gives us something that we share. But I was curious as to whether you, in your experience, if you find that in communities like, say, New York or other places where the Jewish population is more concentrated or more visible, do you find that the anti-Semitism is higher or not as high there? Or do you find that where Jewish populations are not as dense, that because people don't get exposed to that religion, because they don't get a chance to find out as much about it, do you feel like it's worse in a underpopulated city?
It's not an either or, it's a both and. And so I don't know what's worse. We would say that if it happens anywhere, it's pretty bad. We can all take a look at what happened, for example, in Pittsburgh, which again, doesn't have as large of a concentration of Jewish people as the greater Manhattan area does or New York does. But, that was terrible. If you remember the story from Billings, Montana, a number of years ago, and the way that the people of Billings, Montana responded, right, by taking menorahs and putting it in everybody's window, publishing that in the newspaper that everybody should do that, and then marching through the streets. It's a little bit of everything. To be Jewish, for example, in Lake City, Florida. Now, if you know Lake City, Florida, good for you. It's a little north of Gainesville, Florida, where I served as the rabbi for many, many years before coming here. I was a campus minister there. In Lake City, Florida, I think still up until recently, had a sign outside of the city outskirts that said, the Klan welcomes you to Lake City, Florida. All right, but I grew up in a world where there were still signs. I was very, very young. I was born in the mid '60s, but it's still in Miami Beach, where my mom grew up. There were signs up that said, "This neighborhood is restricted. No Jews, no dogs." And the remark of an African American once to a Jewish person that he happened to be driving. He was a driver, and he had a Jewish person he was driving, and the Jewish person who was not from Miami, didn't know the South really well, shook his head and said, "Oh, this, by the way, isn't the case any longer." But he's like, "Oh, this is terrible." And the driver said, "Sir, they don't even care about us enough to put us on the sign," an African American driver said. Now, look, whether it's in the big city or in the small town, right? Someone who is anti-Jewish will hate us for whatever the reasons are. And in some places, the hatred exists even if there's no Jewish people, Paul. It's terrible. and trying to find the rationale for it or the statistic for it, or here's the place where it doesn't happen. It's just not the case.
Yeah, I guess I was wondering if it was just lack of education or knowledge, maybe just, fear of the unknown.
Might be. And that's why your voices matter, right? People that know Jewish people. That incident that I told you about at the immigration rally, as much as I was standing up for myself, you know who really stood up for me? Was a fellow religionist who happened to be Muslim, who was speaking at the rally. And he said to this person, look, you have to stop this. You don't know Rabbi Andy. And if you want to talk Israel, this is not the time or the place to do it. We've got more important issues right now. But it didn't stop a professor from Guilford College coming after me 2 days later. Anti-Semitism sometimes is that canary in the coal mine, Paula.
Yeah.
And you want to see where things are about to go bad, all right, for lots of groups. Anti-Semitism usually can be, is kind of a leading hatred. It's not the only one,
right,
but it can be there, and it's sad to say that it's just everywhere. So yeah, as much as I've racked my brain to try to find, what are the conditions, and maybe we can escape it by doing A, B, and C. I do think that you're right. I think that that exposure and education is important. Our voice, as we've heard in other instances also, the heavy lifting cannot only be done by the Jewish people, right? The material is out there. The classes do need to be taught. Close to 50% of Americans under the age of 40 have been exposed to Holocaust denial and don't know the sheer facts of what happened between 1933 and 1945 to the Jewish people, that we were targeted and subject to a genocide, and that 1 out of every 3 Jewish people alive at the time was murdered by the Nazis and or their accomplices, and that we still have not replaced our numbers since prior to World War II, and that's including thriving in North America and having a state of our own in the Middle East.
Well, I myself still, every year, it seems like I learn something I didn't know about the Holocaust, because it's not anything anyone wants to talk about. They want to bury it, so...
And then one of the things that we hear every so often is, well, that's all you want to talk about, you Jews. You just want to talk about the Holocaust. You just want to make us feel bad and guilty. It's like, boy, even there, it's like, you know what? Did Rabbi Gutman say this last time? Maybe he did. One of his answers to that type of a press against us, because the Holocaust happened 80 years ago, right? Right around 80 years ago was when Auschwitz was liberated. He said, listen, you think we're still talking about the Holocaust and that's a problem? There was once a pharaoh who thought it was a good idea to enslave us and to throw babies into the river, and we are still talking about that.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, you are too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
I have a question, if I may. We talk a lot in our church about how to make our church relevant to younger people. Are you encountering the same thing within the synagogue? Are you losing families, or are they drawn to come to the synagogue?
Well, we are, I think that thank you, Lord. We are having, I think we are involved in the same conversations. And so everybody's got their work cut out for them. I wish you tremendous success, because remember, the more that you're successful as culture leaders, right? I think that it just kind of, it works for everybody. That's the type of, let's call it, trickle up or whatever it was that works, trickle down that works, right? When the culture leaders set the pace for what's out there. But I think we all know that, what is it? Was it the Pew? The Pew Trust that does those studies. and I'll just make this real quick because I don't want to, I know you want to talk about anti-Semitism, but they talked about the rise of the nuns. But here it's not N-U-N, it's N-O-N-E, and that's people who say, well, I don't have any religion, more spiritual, whatever that means, right? Because being a Presbyterian is pretty spiritual, being Jewish is pretty spiritual. I don't, if Eastern religions are the only thing, and meditation is the only thing that can be characterized as spirituality, I'm not sure what to do. I mean, those are wonderful spiritual paths, but each of us can find our way to meditate also, or to do other things like that. But no, we're out there doing some pretty heavy lifting when it comes to working with those who are in their 20s and 30s. We just find that in the Jewish community, those numbers are smaller than they are in other population areas, like, and I'm not going to go down the long laundry list of places that are bigger. This is a good place, Greensboro is. To be Jewish, not just to live, I love it here, but to be Jewish. But beyond that, I would say that this is also a place where, we've got our work cut out for us. Yeah. Other questions maybe related to anti-Semitism or some of the things we were talking about, or other things, Mary? Yeah.
I was just wondering how you all deal with anti-Semitism with your children and your youth.
Yeah.
How you approach them with this and how to deal with it.
So let me tell you this. First and foremost, we're not talking about. I'm gonna like kind of lift up the hood, take you under the hood, because I've been an educator for this congregation for the past 18 years. So let's take it for an example. I'm gonna just take this Holocaust education, right? We really don't go into any of the details until about 7th or 8th grade. Now, does that mean the kids aren't reading the books like Number of the Stars, when they're in the 4th grade? They are, okay? We also want to try to move them away from books and stories that are a little too simplistic. The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, for example, was one that we really weren't high on, because give me a break, right? You're a child of a Nazi prison guard, and you think that that's a kid in pajamas over there. You've probably been spoon-fed anti-Semitism for your entire life in order to live proximate to an internment or a death camp. But that doesn't make for good children's literature. But we also shouldn't be sugarcoating stuff. Number of the Stars, maybe when they're in the 4th or 5th grade. But in the 7th and 8th grade, when we teach it, we don't only teach that we as Jewish people were like lambs led to the slaughter. We also talk about moments where, against all odds, we stood up and we fought back. We teach about the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising and other forms of physical resistance, as well as spiritual and cultural resistance. How we said we're not going to let you dehumanize us. And how in many ways those people who led that charge weren't the only ones that survived, but were among the survivors. That's where we get the stories from. We are still able to introduce our youth to survivors, but that will not be the case for much longer. But let's say something like Pittsburgh happens, right? We as a community need to be ready in this day and age to talk with children at all levels. But I got to tell you, what we do is no different than what we all did after September 11th. Think about it, right? How did we coach families? Because, again, we had to talk to parents first and foremost. We know the facts. Turn your TV off. Because living through it every 5 minutes with a different commentator just re-traumatizes yourself and your children, and you need a deep breath after it. In addition to that, look at what we did, right? You come together in order to pray. You know what happened in Temple Emmanuel right behind me here in this fake picture? Maybe some of you were there. 1,500 people were in our building that I think 2 or 3 days later for a service that was led by clergy from around Greensboro. We were one of hundreds of such services that took place in the United States. There were so many people that came to Temple Emmanuel that evening that a makeshift peace rally broke out around the fountain that's right behind me in the fake picture of 600 people. Over 2,000 people came to Temple that night. So it's important that our youth also saw that broader response. We tell them that they are still worthwhile. We teach them about anti-Semitism, but we teach them that the whole world is not anti-Semitic. Because I showed you the stat 25%, that means 75% of the world doesn't harbor those, things in such a large degree. But still, it's a billion people, right? But I got to tell you this, Mary. When we teach our unit to middle schoolers on the Holocaust, we really dig deep, and we'll come back not only for middle schoolers, because when they're in high school, we take them to Poland and Israel. We do a much deeper curriculum with them. We're not only teaching that subject. The second part of the curriculum for that year is about the way that the Jewish community interacts nowadays with other religious communities in our area. And so we talk about being a guest or visitor at other religious communities, and being a host to people from other religious communities that come into our space. Now, many of them know that because, as we heard before, what Margaret was saying, you'll come to a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah, or you'll be at temple for something else, right? They see this in their own lifetime, but we teach them about what the reality is in their own backyard right now in terms of positive relationships also. So we're doing our part of the conversation too. And we also teach them as leaders that we will never tolerate them belittling someone else because of who they are on any of the axes that we might look at, that the NCCJ looks at, whether it's economic or racial or national or gender identity or sexual orientation. You go for it. I don't want to hear my youth talking and disparaging Christians or Christianity. I don't stand for it.
Rabbi,
we teach them that also.
Earlier in our time together, you made a reference to anti-Semites, and I don't understand that. Would you unpack that for us?
Yeah, sure. There was a book that was popular, many people reading over the summer called, I think it was by Ibrahim X. Kendi. And you can have your critique of that book if you want to, but he talks about being an anti-racist. It's not just enough, right, to say, but you have to take steps to be an anti-racist. Okay, right. Maybe that's what that is building upon. And for us, for Jewish people, when we look out to the world and we talk about, alliances, we also need for folks out there to check stuff when we're not in the room, when we're not in the locker room, when we're not privy to the conversations. When there's a sermon, and I don't suspect that Sid or Jill or others would give this type of sermon that disparages whether it's because when people hear Jews of old, they sometimes think of Jews today. Not easy. But to check those things and to do it when we're not in the room, that's important. I hope I answered the question, Jack.
Thank you.
Why not give you a chance to suggest to First Presbyterians one thing they could really do that would improve their behavior or their record or whatever. Tell us one thing you think that we really should do.
Listen, I think what you're doing right now is, Jack, keep doing this. And maybe it's what I just said to the other Jack before, right? Which is to, it's hard for me because, this is like when we turn to the African American community and say, well, you guys tell us what we should have to do. Let me turn it back to you, right? That, I think, is the purpose of what you're doing right now. And maybe it's not to go out of your way and to create something. I think awareness, right, is a very important starting point. Look, I could talk about privilege. I could talk about when I walk into the room, right? You would never be forced to take an exam on Sunday morning, and I had to look at that my entire life of of tests and all sorts of other things scheduled on Friday night and Saturday morning. I have to be, I love it, but I have to be on the Guilford County Schools calendaring committee just to make sure that major days on the Jewish calendar that take way too long to explain to everybody will have at least some sensitivity, or maybe even be days off, because no one would ever think of having school or an exam on Good Friday, on Easter, or on Christmas. But I've got to talk about Yom Kippur. I got to talk about Passover and sensitivity to diet. So it's stuff like that I just, let's have resonant voices out there, that invite in. It's not taking people's place at the table. It's just making sure the table is big enough so that we can all sit at it. But I think that, to argue that Jews don't have a place at the table in Greensboro it's disingenuous. I mean, this is a city that by and large gets it right on many Jewish things. But I also want you to understand that when you come to Temple Emmanuel as a visitor, as a guest on a service, and you walk through security there, that ain't just because we need parking lot attendants to show people where to park, right? That's because of, Pittsburgh, we just had to up our profile, but we've been doing it for much, much longer, and it's about saving people's lives and keeping the bad guys out. It's part of, it's like recognizing that that's there too. So I didn't answer your question. What should you do? You should continue to talk, and you should say, you don't have to come to me with anything, but that's the spiritual check within a religious community. Our brothers and sisters, right? Long-time family members, right? We know you guys are there for us, and I appreciate that.
Are there others?
I was going to say, Andy, you mentioned that you had a Muslim friend who spoke up for you, or who had your back at the rally. What are the relationships right now between the Jewish and the Muslim community? We seem to have a growing number of Muslims in the area. Are there fairly friendly relationships between the two communities, or is that an issue?
No, it's not an issue. Good. Not an issue at all. And so, on my speed dial is that friend, but he's not the only person that we've had. So let me give you some instances. During Ramadan, nearly every year, of course, I don't have to say except for in COVID times, because we all understand that. But at least one night, I would go to the mosque when they were breaking the fast. Look, I have a lot of, this is part of what I admitted to Donna when we were in Israel, right? I have a lot of colleagues that when we did comparative religion in rabbinic school, our rabbinic school, by the way, is 5 years post-undergraduate. It's like going to med school. All right, so one of the areas that we do is like some comparative religion classes. I'm not ignorant to Christianity, but I decided that I was going to do more of my focus on Islam, right, and on some of the nexus points of Judaism and Islam. So a little bit of a background, right? That and $4 might get me a cup of coffee at Starbucks, right? But having said that, through these connections, at least one night when the fast is broken for Ramadan, I'll go over to the mosque, on the far east side of town, to spend, an evening there. When the massacre happened in Christchurch, New Zealand, remember that? I mean, it seems like forever ago. It wasn't that long ago, right? I think it happened on a Thursday maybe, or on a Wednesday. That Friday, Rabbi Gutman, Rabbi Ben Gideon, and I were over at the mosque expressing our solidarity. So, and a number of years, actually, when the Muslim ban was announced, remember when the Muslim ban was announced, that was about 4 years ago, we had a group of teenagers get together. We did this actually together with the NCCJ. We pitched the idea to the NCCJ. They helped provide some resources, and we got a group of 11th and 12th graders from the mosque and from Temple Emmanuel together. It was right around the time of Hanukkah. I mean, I'm just spitballing and throwing some ideas out there, right? And it was right around the time of Hanukkah. So we started off the night by saying, well, why don't we show you one of our rituals and you'll show us one of your rituals and we'll get to know each other a little better. But then we're going to have a dialogue and then we're going to do an art project together. Okay. in our chapel, not downtown, but in our chapel in this campus here, we lit a menorah for the Hanukkah menorah. And then afterwards, it was right the perfect time for Muslim evening prayers. So in our chapel, Temple Emmanuel Greensboro, right, where we're usually facing towards Jerusalem, they got their compasses out, figured out where Mecca was. They faced towards Mecca and did the evening services in our chapel. And we were there as honored observers. We didn't have to be participants because you can go to other services and be observers. And that was something also very special. So what's the state of the relations? The communication is there. Maybe it's not buddy every week hanging out, but the lines of communication are open. A phone call, if not to the imam, then to one of the leaders of the community is an easy phone call, even if it's a challenging issue. And honestly, there really haven't been many challenging issues over the years.
That's great. Thank you.
That's a great question. I love it. And I will say this, right? When we did the Thanksgiving service at First Pres, what was that? That was not this past Thanksgiving 2020, but 2019 with the big cornucopia and everything like that. It was awesome. Okay. One of the things we do is we realize that this is more than just, Jews and Christians, right? I'm sorry, Christians and us Jewish people, right? But there's always a voice out of the Muslim community, right? There's always someone that joins us to share insights from Islam. So you've been part of that conversation also. And that's based on longstanding relationships that the Faith Leaders Council has, in addition to whatever personal connections or whatever Jewish communal connections there are.
Andy, we're excited about your continued leadership and the new role that you'll have very soon. And know that you've already made connections with Jill. And I just feel very hopeful in that sense. And just want to thank you for the years that you've already served here in Greensboro, everything you continue to do for our community and for all of us. And so we look forward to that relationship continuing and maybe even strengthening. And I think you've alluded to a number of things that we could do on our own as a church as we continue our work, but maybe also together. So thank you so much for being with us tonight. We greatly
Thank you, Donna. I promise I won't be long-winded here because clergy can do that. I'm sorry, I can do that. Jill definitely doesn't. But let me come back to Jack. Actually, if you want to help with something, maybe a next step would be that a group of us from our congregations talk with each other, right? Maybe it needs to wait when we're not on Zoom because conversations are much better when they're in person. But when we get out of this, maybe we put that together. Or older high school teens talking with each other, right? Like that idea from Judaism and Islam. Because I am of the opinion that the earlier that we create these connections, right, especially before they go off to college, right, we get a running head start that gets in front of some of the other stuff, even if it is somewhat suppressed or covert in terms of the way that we look at one another. We wouldn't say things out loud, but that's kind of what's hiding in the back there, maybe creating those connections. So Jack, if you want to work on that or talk to folks about what steps we might take forward, because I don't want to leave it just in, you got a lot of heavy lifting to do, okay? Because we all do. And I'd be happy to take that conversation forward or to introduce you to people from Temple Emmanuel if you don't already know them, where we might be able to take that conversation forward. Fair enough? Let's do it in partnership. Thank you. Thank you, Donna.
Fred reminded us, Andy, about, it's been a number of years ago that we did a 10 Commandments study together. And there may be people on the call who were a part of that, but I was thinking about his reminding us about that. And he also was suggesting some of the work, and then you had mentioned too, of Amy Jill Levine and her work that we might consider.
Essential, because she knows the vernacular. much better than this rabbi does. She knows the sources and I think is able to teach from them in a way that is eye-opening on the inside. Just like if we need our eyes open on the inside, you tell Amy Jill and she'll come talk to me and whoever's on our clergy staff.
And I love that connection with our youth too. I know we come over during confirmation, but I love what you just laid out about what the youth were doing together. So that those all have great possibilities. David, I'm going to ask you to close us in prayer. And Andy, last week Fred sang. I'm sure you're surprised by that. And we know you sing.
You want me to go get my guitar?
I don't know if you have your guitar, but I know you sing too. Or David actually might want to close us in a song and a prayer.
Let's pray together. Immortal, invisible God, only wise, in light inaccessible, hid from our eyes. Most blessed, most glorious, the Ancient of Days. Almighty, victorious, thy great name we praise. Gracious God, we know you by many names, and we speak those many names to you, and you know us by our names. And you know us as your children created in your image. We thank you for this time of being your children together, seeking to know and love one another, and also to be reminded of matters of justice and loving kindness and walking humbly with you. So take this and use it in our hearts and issue whatever calls are right for us as your children in this city of Greensboro. We give you thanks for this gathering and for our life. Amen. I won't sing, but I'll just offer our common blessing. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon you and give you peace this day and forevermore. Amen.
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 Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you all so much.
Andy, thank you so very much.
Yes, thank you.
Stick around for just a moment.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you so much, Andy. That was wonderful.
You're very welcome.
It's
Very welcome.
hard to hear lots of it, and I'm sure it's not easy for you going through that as well, but I think it's so important. Just really appreciate it.
It's not the topic, my go-to topic, for obvious reasons, right? I mean, who wants to talk about hatred, right? Who wants to talk about pain? But I really
Fred mentioned the same thing. He said he'd love for us to consider doing some other topics together that weren't quite as painful.
I like the idea of a 10 Commandments study. Listen, if each one of us as clergy takes 2 commandments, I don't know who's going to get stuck with those last 2, but but if each one of us takes 2 commandments and we break it up, right? That might be good.
Yeah.
And kind of share the wealth and everything. But I apologize for that. Look, we're right at 7:00 right now. You guys are good. I had from 5:30 to 7 on my calendar, which is I think what you told me.
It's perfect.
I just hope that I left enough time for people to talk. I hope I didn't take up too much of the space. I wanted to at least get that presentation in on anti-Zionism, because it does take a lot more time to express than just, Israel's a bully or something like that, which is so easy to say and so inaccurate. It doesn't take into account that, in terrible things in the world, you've got two sides. But you've been there and you've seen some of the complexities, and it's so much better to talk about those complexities when you're there.
That's so true. That's another opportunity is, the possibility of going back to the Holy Land with, I think Jill is very interested in that.
Yeah.
And
I think that's a year 3 or a year 4 project for me. My year 1 project is to transition, is to transition our congregation.
Yeah.
26 years Fred's been with us, right? So to shepherd that shift, especially, look, the Batses aren't in Greensboro anymore, are they?
Right. They moved down to Southport just to be able to have that distance, because part of that is what the Presbyterian Church requires. You really are not supposed to come back into the church for at least 2 years.
Yeah.
But that was, I know how hard that must have been for them, but was probably a very smart thing.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't have those rules. It is a recommendation, but the Gutmans are planning on living here in town, and I have the type of trusting relationship with Fred and vice versa that, we're looking to make that work, especially as he becomes our emeritus rabbi. But and
Kathy, Sid's wife, Kathy, had retired the year before, so I think that made it easier too. So I think it'll be interesting to see if they come back after in a bit.
Tell you, make your life somewhere, and it's not easy, even if the presbytery tells you.
That's right. That's exactly.
But there's a young colleague that's going to be transitioning into her first role in the community, in a community as a rabbi full time, and I'm excited about that. But as we make our way and by the way, we're all going to be transitioning, God willing, out of these restrictions and into a different type of not fully open, but definitely a hybrid setting going forward, and just moving into that space, and so on and so forth. So, but year 3, right? Because it's a heck of a lot of work, or year 4. I think it would be high time for us to start to get everybody back. By that point, there are some ministers that we turned to for that one trip, and we said, "Come with us," but they weren't able to.
Right.
I think for that next group to come with us, that'll be a good time to do it.
That'd be great.
All right. Well, was there anything that you needed to call me out on, or anything that you needed to say? Well,
Not at all.
You really stepped over the line there, or Schmendrick, what were you thinking when you said that, or
I appreciate your speaking truth, and lots for us to continue to think about. And like you said, there's so much awareness for us to continue to experience and know about. So, and I love, once again, continuing to think about what it means to be allies and stay connected with our friendship is a really important thing.
Yeah. You know what? If the guiding rule is don't talk about African Americans without African Americans in the room, maybe the best thing we can hope for is not to talk about Israelis without Israelis in the room, or to talk about Jews without Jews in the room.
Yeah. Really important. Thank you so much, Andy.
Donna, give my best to the family, and just, all around, and just lots of blessings to you. Thanks for putting this all together. This has been a real highlight of the month. And I've had some good ones so far, including hiring this colleague.
I know that's a big relief to get kind of moved past that. Whew, that's a lot.
All right. Thank
you so much, Andy. Take care. Bye-bye.